Hello everyone, here is Muhammad. In today's video we are going to talk about shading and lightings. So as you saw in my previous video, in the last video we talked about how to create simple objects using the basic shapes that we talked about in the very first video. And today we are going to talk about lightings and shadings, which are extremely important components in any drawing, because lightings and light sources is actually what makes your drawing alive and makes it vital. So to understand lighting, you have to understand the basic of it. So what is light actually? The light is light source, for example, coming from this direction. And let's assume, for example, we have a circle, right? So let's assume this circle or this ball is sitting on the floor. This is our floor, assuming that this is our floor and this is our ball, and the light source is coming from this direction. So light source hits surfaces, and these ball have surfaces. So these surfaces should be the most illuminated surfaces in the ball. Why? Because the light is actually hitting from this direction, and the opposite side of the ball is actually should be the darkest part of the ball, because the light is coming from this direction. It means from this direction we don't have any light, so it should be darker. So before explaining the shading techniques, because there are different kind of shapes of shading techniques, of course, and yeah, eventually as with the more and more practice, you end up using the most, or the technique that you are mostly comfortable with. I'm going to show it afterwards, of course, in today's session. But for example, let me just show you what I meant by my previous comment. So assuming the light is coming from this direction, this part is gonna be darker, and this darkness will start to fade out as I come closer to the light source, right? So this should be darker. I'm gonna explain a technique afterwards, of course, but I just wanted to show you a very quick example about what I talked about. So just a quick comment in between. I would like to say, when you talk about lighting and shadings, picking up a proper pencils are very important, because so when you use a pencil or different kind of pen, but today we are going to talk about pencil because we are using them in today's video. So there are different kind of pen. So as you see here, so we have the P14, HP, P6, P10, P4, P8, and P2. So it starts actually with the HP. HP is the lightest one. So if I wanna try few, I'm not gonna try all of them for the sake of time, but HP, it gives me kind of as you see, it's not that dark tone. So if I pick P2, which is a little bit darker because it starts from HP, then B1, B2, and so on up to the B14, I guess, or 12. Yeah, so if I pick B2, for example, as you see, the tone is a little bit darker, right? You notice. So B4 is gonna be darker, then b6, b8. It's gonna get darker and darker, as you see. b10, much darker, and b14, which is pretty dark compared to HB. So these kind of tones are very important actually, because this is what gives us like this shading, the proper shading. For example, going back to our example, so this sphere, or this, yeah, let's call it sphere, as I told you before, we need like a dark shadow here, but using only HB will not be enough, because it doesn't matter how much or how hard I press the pen or I try to get like a dark tone, it will not give you the tone we need, because it's HB, it's kind of like light tone. So we need to pick up something a little bit darker, for example, B8, for example. So you notice, so we immediately started to have darker tone, which actually gives us much more like realistic look of the ball, right? We can also crack it up to B14 maybe. That's too much, but there is no harm of using it actually, just to get very, very dark area here, right? As you see. So as you see, like adding tone one by one, it automatically gives us this realistic feeling that the light is actually hitting from this direction, and this side of the sphere is dark. So when we talk about shading, we need to also consider the shadow of the light. So talking about the shadow of the light, so as we said that the light is coming from this direction, it means if I drew line from this perspective, right, following the light line source, which is actually going this way, so it kind of like gives us this shape. So this shape is actually the sphere. When the light hits from this direction, it's gonna look like an oval. Why? Because of the angle of the perspective. The angle of the perspective, if I drew, for example, this is my 0 point, right? And this is my light source, and this is my floor point. So if I draw a line to make a perspective here, it's actually giving us this kind of like line. And this angle, you see, so this angle, what makes the shape of the sphere, the shadow of it, makes it as an oval because of this angle. So the lower I go with my angle, the more oval, so the more pressed will this oval shape will be of the shadow. So for example, let me just try to broadcast it. So for example, this is the shadow. So as you see, of course the shadow is gonna be very dark here and start to fade out as much as you go back or up, out. So what I meant by this angle, so for example, let's take another example. So this is the sphere, right? So if the light source is coming from this direction, which is a little bit upper, right? So if I draw now very, very light line here, following the light direction line, which is this one, and this one, big HB, and this one, and this is my floor, right? So the sphere is sitting on the floor. So the light coming from this source, from this angle, gives me the shadow of the ball looking like this. Because logically speaking, the light is coming from an upper angle in compared to this one, which makes the shadow move a little bit forwards to follow this light line. You know what I mean? So as a drawing shadow, it's kind of difficult. You need to really like practice it to really understand it well, because it's kind of like you have to master the skill of imagining the or analyzing the shape, how it will look if it's 3D or if it's like realistic sphere, not only circle, right? Because when we talk about circle, it's kind of like 2D or like only 2 dimension. What I mean by 3D, 3 dimension, it means it has height, so the 3 dimension, right? And yeah, but you don't have to worry about shadow for now, because it only comes with practice, and the more you understand the light source, the more shadow the more proper shadow you will be able to cast in your drawing. So what you need to focus on in this session, which is actually what I eventually wanted to deliver in this session, is actually the shading technique. So the shading techniques, or shading in drawing, have different kind of techniques. So for example, let's draw few spheres just to make examples. So the techniques have different kind of names and different kind of way of creating them or using them. So for example, so the techniques that, or the most common and known techniques when it comes to shadings are hatch, crosshatch, tonal, stipple, smudge, and scumble. So hatch is actually shading using lines in one way, in one direction. Let me pick maybe 4P or P4 to have a little bit of dark lines. So as you see, in the hatch technique, I'm using lines in one direction. And as I said, assuming the light direction is coming from this direction, the light source, sorry, is coming from this direction, this part of the sphere should be illuminated or bright, and the bottom part should be the dark one. And I'm just adding lines one by one in the dark area and start to fade out like this way, right? So the crosshatch is pretty much similar to the hatch, but you use different as 2 lines in different directions. That's why it's called cross. So for example, we have the lines in one direction, and I start to add lines in a different direction in the opposite one. That's why it's called crosshatch. And doing this, I could control how many lines I want to add in this area, and how many lines I want to reduce in this area. As you see here, and so on and so on. So the third one is called channel. It's kind of like, I would say, like a combination between hatch and cross, and the third direction, which is like, for example, using the lines in this direction and this direction and this direction and this direction. So it's like kind of like combination of lines that you want to create here to have your shading. For example, I started with the hatch, then crosshatch, then I start doing lines in a different angle, then a different angle, then again this angle, or maybe this direction again, or this direction. So it's kind of like randomly choosing the direction you want your line to be in, but I still need to keep in mind that the dark area should be this area and the light area should be this area because our light source is coming from this direction, as we said. So I'm just adding lines in way too many different directions. As you see. So stipple, it's kind of like an easy way of shading, but the cons of using stipple is actually it takes time, because stipple is actually using dots, like adding dots one by one. It takes forever, it takes very long time, but you can control, so you have more control over your shading, you know, because let's say we have added like way too many points here, or dots, sorry, so on. I'm gonna just like try to speed it up a little bit, because as I said, it takes a lot of time. But the the advantage of this technique is you have full or more control, I would say, more control over your shading, because you can literally add your dots one by one in the darkest area of your object and reduce or use less and less in the area which should be the light source or the light surfaces. As you see, I'm gonna try to I'm gonna try to speed it up a little bit just to give you the idea what is this technique about, and so on and so on. So this is called stipple. So the next one is actually called scumble. Scumble is actually not using lines per se, but using, you see, so when I used lines, I used this kind of, so the very pointy head of the pen. But using the scumble technique, you kind of like use this area. It's a little bit like the full part of the pen. So if I gonna like, instead of doing or positioning my hand this way, I can maybe position it this way in order to use this part, right? This part. So you will notice now I'm not like drawing lines per se, but like kind of like creating tone. With my pen. So as you see here, if I wanna just try to zoom it in a little bit. So if you see, it's kind of like very smudgy, or very like kind of a smoothness so that this object has, and we kind of like add it gradually. Without like making very hard lines. Right? So smudge, so the last technique is actually the most common one, and especially for beginner, where you can actually like use your finger to add some tones. For example, let's say we added like very dark area here. I use my finger and try to smudge it a little bit. Sorry, this is scumble, by the way, and this is smudge. Sorry for the mistake, I just mixed them. So this is scumble and this is smudge. Smudge is actually what the name entails. So smudge is from smudge, because you are using your finger to create this kind of like gradient and the shadow. So, and the way of doing it is very easy. You can like do with your pen a very hard tone where your shadow is, and try to smudge it a little bit one by one with your finger. Of course your finger won't be clean, but this is how the technique is about, or what is this technique is about. You can add as much tone as you want, and you can scratch them as well. You can do it either with finger, or you can buy this one, which is actually like as a different kind of pen that comes again with the Faber-Castell. So with this package, yeah. So this one you can actually use it to make some smudge, as you see. So if I add some tone here with my pen, I can try to go over it one by one, and kind of like reduce this hardness between this tone and this tone, and reduce the contrast. And this is actually what this pen does, because you cannot draw anything with it, it just creates smudge, and that's all. Ideally, you can use this one not only for pencils, but also for kohl. If you are drawing or using kohl for drawing, you can also use this. And as you see, so our shadow for this sphere looks way too smoothy, because first of the technique that we used, which is smudge using fingers or this tool, and second, it looks like pretty much like way smoother than the others, because as I said, so the techniques, although they are different, but they are giving us like the similar results, because our light source is coming from this direction. All of them have the unique look, which is actually this part should be illuminated, and this part should be dark, and so on and so on. So as you see, this is what shading and lighting is about. Of course, this is not everything about shading. Shading is way much more than that. When it comes to pencil or kohl or any kind of drawing, shading and lighting is a very huge topic and very big topic. So in order to cover that, 1 session or 2 sessions, maybe 3 sessions are not enough, definitely enough. But in this session, I just wanted to give you an overview, what's shading and lighting about, how does it work, and yeah, like simple techniques that you can take it home and yeah, try it out by yourself. So yeah, today I would like also to thank you again for watching, and enjoy it. And remember, anyone can draw.